It is my great pleasure and privilege to introduce Dr. V. Sudesh sir. He is professor of law at Bangalore Law University and he completed his LLB in the year 1991, LLM in the year 1993, PhD 2005. His specialization is labor laws. He completed his PhD under the guidance of V.B. Katino, former Vice Chancellor Gulbarga University. He is having 25 years of teaching experience in the field of law. So far, he produced 6 PhDs. Most of them are settled in different important positions. And sir attended so many national, international seminars, workshops, and he authored so many lessons, chapters in different fields, books. And is a Board of Studies chairman in the Bangalore Law University, in the Bangalore University, and also member in so many universities. He is expert in framing syllabus, question papers, models, and etc. He completed 4 research projects financed by very important organizations in India. He published nearly 15 papers with ISSN, ISBN numbers in different national and international law journals. Those journals are recognized by UGC and some other important organizations in India. He is acted as chairperson for so many seminars and acted as resource person for so many seminars. Recently, in Hyderabad, Pennakanti Law College, people are conducted one seminar. In that also, sir acted as resource person. And he authored nearly 2 books and dedicated his different chapters in different fields. And he attended so many training programs, conferences, workshops also. I think he is a very resourceable person for the present session. I hope all the participants may get benefit. From these words, once again, I am congratulating Sudesh sir and other participants also, because your participants are very lucky today, because Sudesh sir is going to deliver a very important lecture, I hope. From these words, I am handovering further proceedings to Professor Sudesh sir to continue the lecture. Thank you, Sudesh sir.
Good evening to one and all. I think I am privileged to be part of the FDP program organized by University Law College, Department of Studies in Law, Osmania University. Yesterday, I took part in the inaugural program. I listened to the Chancellor, Madam speaking. I have listened to the lecture of Professor Venkat Rao, and I know in what direction this FDP should be proceeding. Before I begin anything, let me thank the principal, Dr. Gali Vinod Kumar, the chairperson of the Department of Studies in Law, the Dean Faculty of Law, the Registrar of University for giving me this opportunity. Now, I have about 28 or 29 slides. I have 1.5 hours time. Maybe I will take a little less than that also. My slides will throw the issues and challenges facing the working class. My limitations are that I will not be touching upon detail about labor laws, because when I saw your program itinerary, I saw a speaker who will be specifically speaking on the labor laws. So therefore, in order to not to overlap discussion, I will be restricting, though I'll be tempted, but I'll be restricting because my PhD is in the labor law, my LLM is in labor law. My guru is all about labor law. Professor Kutino has taught us labor law. Therefore, I will try not to enter into the details of the labor laws. However, I'll be trying to highlight the problems, issues, and challenges of the working class. So first come first. The question is,
बस अभी से बच्चा कोई स्कॉलरशिप आया तो
someone spoke in between, I don't know. Anyhow, it was not directed at me. Anyhow, the question is, who are the working class about whom we have to discuss, especially the impact of COVID-19 on the working class? Well, I'm giving you a choice to select who are this working class. The white collared or the blue collared or the collarless? Whom do you want to include here? Obviously, we are speaking about the collarless. It is because these collarless employees upon whom the impact of COVID-19 has been very severe. The factory worker, the coolie, the hamali at the railway station, the migrant construction worker, the street vendors in the city of Hyderabad maybe, the dhobiwala, the one who irons our clothes, our mali, gardener, the raddiwala, the domestic help. Are we talking about these working class, or are we talking about a new kind of working class, the self-employed, the delivery boys, the Swiggy, the Zomato boys, the Flipkart boys? Probably we have to include all these people when we discuss about the impact of COVID-19 on the working class. What are the issues and challenges to start with? I mean, there's only one issue, and the challenge is also on that. The issue is about access to livelihood. And the challenge is how to overcome this access to livelihood post COVID-19. Of course, the COVID-19 pandemic goes on. Maybe we don't know, maybe one more year, few more months, but it goes on. During this period of COVID-19, how do we ensure access to livelihood is the issue and also the challenge. In fact, if you look at the working class, if you go little back into history and the early period of industrialization, at least in India, we have seen the early days of industrialization wherein workers migrated from their villages to cities and towns where they could find employment. However, they met with unbearable conditions of work, unhygienic conditions of work, affected by diseases, pandemics, then also plague, lack of basic civic amenities, etc., etc. So when we go back to those times, and when we compare the post or the during COVID-19 impact, we find that the hardship of a working class has hardly mitigated. So keep that in mind while we discuss about the problems of the working class. Also keep in mind, when you study about the impact of COVID-19, the visuals of a migrant labor, which all of us have seen on television channels, we have read about it in newspapers, how the migrant worker was found on the highway road with family, how a pregnant lady was carrying a suitcase on her shoulder, on her head, how these people were killed on the railway tracks, railway stations, how they were waiting at bus stands, how they were loaded into trucks, how they were shoved into tempos. So when you have to speak about the impact of COVID-19 on working class, dear seniors, dear friends, dear students, please keep these things in mind. Now, we move on to the next slide. Now, if you look at the large working population, we know that various literature in this regard, and even a survey by the NSSO says that 92 to 94% of the working population in India is in the unorganized sector. And you know, the peculiarity of the labor market in India is they're into organized as well as formal sector. Organized formal sector or the informal sector. And most labor law professors, labor law teachers, labor law students would know this, that the informal sector does not have any formal contract of employment, does not have any specific legislative protection. And therefore, they're working in informal sector. Next slide, please. Next slide, yeah. Oh. I think it would be better if I share this slide because there's some trouble there. So what we are talking now about the impact of COVID-19 is basically focused on the unorganized or the informal sector of labor in India. The unorganized nature of employment category includes agricultural laborers, migrant workers, bonded laborers, casual and contract laborers. A separate category of occupation group, which also includes landless agriculture laborers. When I say landless agriculture laborers, because these are people who have probably migrate to cities like Bangalore, to Chennai, to Hyderabad, to Delhi, to Mumbai in search of some work. There are marginal farmers, there are fishermen, there are weavers, there are leather workers, those engaged in animal industry, labeling, packing, bidding. So the inclusive part of unorganized workers is a long list of people who are denied of any sort of protection by the labor laws that we have in India. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Now, let me begin by now speaking about the International Labour Organization in connection with the COVID-19. 2019 was the centenary year of International Labour Organization. 1919, after the World War, the Treaty of Versailles, it was formed, a tripartite organization. In 2019, the International Labour Organization marked its centenary with the adoption of the Centenary Declaration for the Future Work. And this declaration recognizes that the world of work is undergoing transformative change driven by technological innovations, demographic shifts, climate change, and globalization. What is important is the ILO sets out a roadmap of action for the organization and its tripartite constituents to shape and direct these changes through, what is important here is through a human-centered approach to the future of work. Human-centered approach to the future of work in the context of the persistent poverty, inequalities, injustices, conflict, and disasters that continue to threaten shared prosperity and decent work for all. So just a year after that, where are we now? Next slide, please. Yeah. Next slide. 9 months after the adoption of the Centenary Declaration, COVID-19 was declared as a pandemic by the WHO. Now, what is suddenly, after adopting a human-centered approach, we find ourselves or the ILO to recommit itself to the declaration. The pandemic, as per the ILO, has devastated the world of work, causing massive human suffering and laying bare the extreme vulnerability of many millions of workers and enterprises. What the COVID-19 has shown is how much vulnerable these workers, informal workers, are there. Therefore, we find that in its report, next slide, please. The latest ILO estimates that are that large-scale workplace closures around the world has led to reduction in hours worked of 10.7% worldwide, in the second quarter of this year. That translates into the loss of 305 million jobs calculated on the basis of 48 hours of work. So what we find here is, in medical terms, the virus, of course, does not discriminate. But in its world of work, impact, it has hit the most disadvantaged, the vulnerable in the hardest and the cruelest way. So exposing the devastating consequences of inequalities. What the ILO stresses is that the inequalities have been openly demonstrated because of the impact of COVID-19. The informal economy is where over 6 out of 10 working people, 6 out of 10 working people make their living from day to day. Of these, 2 billion workers, 1.6 billion face an imminent threat to their livelihood. This is a report of the ILO. I am speaking from ILO report. Of these 2 billion workers, 1.6 billion face an imminent threat to their livelihoods, as average income in the informal economy shrunk by 60% in the first month of the pandemic. That has brought a dramatic increase in the poverty, and the warning from the World Food Programme in April that the next pandemic could be a pandemic of hunger. Next slide, please. Now, another peculiar feature of COVID-19 pandemic is its impact on the women. The pandemic has affected women and men in the world of work differently. Women are overrepresented in most affected sectors such as services, because women are employed in the service sector, or in occupations that are at the forefront line of dealing with pandemic, notably health and care personnel, where they make up 70% of the total. Women also have less access to social protection and bear a disproportionate burden in the provision of care, which has been exacerbated by the closure of schools or care facilities. You know, because of the pandemic, COVID-19 lockdown rules, schools, care facilities have been closed down. So the women working there as ayahs, as teachers, all are now jobless. Additionally, women in the informal economy are often found in the most vulnerable situations. For instance, as domestic workers who have too frequently found themselves in circumstances of extreme difficulty. I will discuss about domestic worker in my later slides. Now, other problem of COVID-19 is on the young people. The young people, many already in a situation of considerable difficulty in labor markets. Before COVID-19 itself, there was a problem, joblessness. Now, what has happened is their prospects have deteriorated sharply. Why? Because training and education have been disrupted massively, with 50% of learners reporting delays in finishing their courses, 10% doubt they will be able to complete them at all. So therefore, of the young people who were in work before the pandemic, young people who were in work before the pandemic, 1 in 6 no longer are, while the others have seen their working hours falling by 23%. And those living education now face bleak prospects in labor market. So, the COVID-19 has not only impacted those who are already working, it has also impacted the future of those who may come into the labor market in due course of time. Next slide, please. Now, in the 4 sectors hardest hit by the pandemic alone, wholesale and retail trade and vehicular repair, manufacturing, accommodation, food services, and real estate and business and administrative activities, no less than 436 million enterprises are at high risk of serious disruption. This is a figure given by the ILO. 436 million are high risk of serious disruption. That means all those people who are directly or indirectly employed with these enterprises are at the risk. Some have already lost their jobs. Some are on the verge of losing their job. Next slide, please. This being so, what has the ILO done? How the ILO intends to meet the challenge? The ILO has advocated, and many of its member states, including India, have implemented COVID-19 responses based upon the 4 pillars set out below. Just now I'll tell, the next slide will come. These four pillars are based on international labor standards. Let us display the four pillars, please. Pillar number one. Now, that is the issue. The issues of losing jobs, the issues of enterprising closing down, the issue is of informal workers, especially women losing jobs. Now, these issues, ILO says that has to be met through these four pillars of resistance. Number one is stimulating the economy and employment. All of us have listened to this when our ministers, finance minister, and many other people, industry ministers, all announced certain policies. Active fiscal policy, accommodative monetary policy, giving loans, etc. Lending and financial support to specific sectors. Sector is one of the modes through which the challenges, the issues could be met. Next, the next pillar titled as supporting enterprises, jobs and incomes. Now, this is very important in order to overcome the inequalities created by COVID-19. Extend social protection to all. We know that the government of India, various state governments have included several informal workers within the social protection bracket. Implement employment retention measures. There have been directions issued by the government to not to retrench the workers, pay them for the COVID-19 lockdown period, etc. Of course, there have been some representation made by the industry to the government, and this matter has gone to the Supreme Court, etc. In terms of payment, because industry themselves, this is of course, we cannot find any clear-cut answers for this, but these are at least where large businesses are organized, they can to some extent mitigate the problems of the workers. Then of course, provide financial, tax and other relief for enterprises. When they are provided financial and tax reliefs, the workers may be indirectly benefited. Next slide, please. The third pillar is about protecting workers in the workplace. This is another agenda of the ILO, wherein the governments have been directed, the respective governments, member states have been directed to have such policies. Strengthen occupational safety and health measures. For example, how much persons should come to work, what protection should be given so that workers fearlessly come to the place of work. Adopt work arrangement. For example, if certain kind of work is possible by teleworking, working from home, please adopt such measures. Prevent discrimination and exclusion, only employing male or not employing women who have children, etc. Such discrimination should be prevented. Provide health access for all. Expand access to paid leave. Next, relying on social dialogue for solutions. This is another important pillar wherein the ILO mandates that each government must be able to strengthen the capacity and resilience of employers and workers organization. What the ILO says is, it is during these times of crisis, it is during the time of pandemic, that the employers and workers must be jointly able to find out solutions, and their capacity must be strengthened by government encouragement. The process of collective bargaining, etc. must be strengthened. Strengthen the capacity of a government. Strengthen social dialogue, collective bargaining, and labor relations institutions and processes. So in order to summarize the approach of the ILO, what I have to tell here is that these four pillars are the way in which the ILO mandates that the impact of COVID-19, especially on the informal sector, can be reduced. Next. Now, what is happening is there is a growing diversity of work. I told you at the beginning itself. The self-employed, for example, the street vendor, contract workers, temporary workers, platform workers, and others with uncertain employment status or entitlements have often experienced difficulty in accessing assistance. The problem which remains during COVID-19 lockdown, post-lockdown, is the same. How these type of workers, self-employed, contract workers, temporary workers, etc., are able to have access to assistance, whether it is legal assistance, whether it is financial assistance, whether it is health assistance. How do these people get into those assistance so that they can feel secured, still remains a large challenge. Of course, the government on its part has built up the Arogya Setu, and several programs of the government of India is trying to see that each informal employee takes the benefit of this. For example, the other day, our Prime Minister announced a package of 5,000 rupees or something like that, free ration, etc., to be extended up to November or December. All these are entitlements which an worker belonging to this type of unorganized worker can take benefit from. Next slide, please. Now, this is what I presented just now is a general statement of the problem of workers, especially the unorganized workers, due to the impact of COVID-19. Let us take a glimpse of how the workers have been impacted industry-wise. I'll take only one or two or three probably, and just to tell you how it has been so severe on them. Now, what you read on the screen is a report published by Society for Labor and Development, just recently published, June 2020. Garment workers India's lockdown, semi-starvation and dehumanization lead to exodus. When you look at the pictures, when you recollect the pictures which you saw on television channels, this statement becomes real. How the workers have been led to semi-starvation and this has led to exodus. People, can you imagine someone riding a bicycle and collapsing? Can you imagine a worker walking, collapsing? These have been the true picture of the garment workers. When I talk about garment workers, I take a specific example of Bangalore, because Bangalore, apart from other places in India, Tirupur or any other state, Tirupur in Tamil Nadu, has got large garment industry. Next slide, please. Now, one of the organization, the NGO, which interviewed a garment worker, this is what she said. It is her statement. She says, there are unions, there is a law. They say we are protected, but we are just helpless garment workers with no protection from anyone. This reflects the reality of the COVID-19 impact on at least one sector, that is the garment sector. Next slide, please. Now, another statement. This is coming from nearby Bangalore, Srirangapattanam. If some of you have visited Mysore, you will remember this place, because around Srirangapattanam, many people migrate to Mandya, to other places, to cities to work in garment industry. She says, I have found my handicapped daughter's Mangala Sutra as a last resort to run the family. Her husband has kidney issues and my daughter can't work. I was the only one who used to earn nearly rupees 8,000 per month and some extra money to run the household. Today, I, along with 3 others, have been asked to lay off for the next 1 month, and we know what it means. We will be jobless soon, laments Mamata Gowda, one of the employees of the garment factory in Srirangapattanam. So this is another statement to re-emphasize the point that despite the governmental measures, despite the ILO mandate, despite the plethora of labor laws that we have, this is the real situation of COVID-19 impact. Next slide, please. A survey by the Garments Mahila Karmikara Munnade, a particular organization, and the Alternative Law Forum in Bangalore reported that 63% of workers in garment factories did not receive the April salaries. Of the rest, many were paid 30 to 50% of their wages. Now, this is all the real information coming from the field. So we cannot dispute this, that the garment sector industry has suffered a lot during the COVID-19. Next slide, please. Now, another category of workers who have suffered a lot, and most of us who employ domestic workers would feel this for sure. You know, in India, there are over 30 million white-collar employees. For every 2 of them, there is 1 domestic worker to run their household. And most of them are women. The count of women entering the domestic sphere of work has risen by 120%. And yet, they remain outside the ambit of social security and legal protection. Next slide, please. What is the problem? The issue with the domestic worker is, despite the contribution of the domestic workers to the care economy, they work long hours, often with meager wages. It is no different as the situation has worsened due to the pandemic. Earlier itself, they were being paid less wages because there is no regulation. Pandemic has further worsened the situation. What happened? As they stepped in frontline work, their employers began looking at them as carriers of the virus, owing to their nature of this work, isn't it so? All those people who reside in apartments, in housing complexes, immediately the moment lockdown was declared, we said, thank you, ma, please don't come from tomorrow. Did we consider how she will run her family? No. This led to the rise of twofold problems of unemployment for some and social stigmatization for all. Even now, many people are not employing domestic workers. There is a stigma attached because they go to many houses to work. So the fault lines in our society created by class and caste-based information discrimination were once again prominent and prejudiced towards the domestic workers. See the plight of domestic workers. Now, which class do they come? White collar, blue collared, collarless. We employ them so freely, but what happens is, during such situations, we discriminate them on the basis of class, if not caste. Next slide. According to International Labour Organization, the assessment made at the beginning of June, I'm all quoting statistics from the ILO, so you can rely upon this, you can find it on the net. 55 million domestic workers are at risk of losing their jobs around the world. In India, the count of domestic workers ranges from the NSSO estimate of 3.9 million as declared in 2019 to 15 million predicted by Ministry of Labor and Employment. Harish Rawat, Minister of Delhi, said 15 million. That is the prediction. Next slide. Now, the peculiar problem, next slide, please. Yeah, let it be. Before that, yeah. Peculiar problem here was when most workers could choose to head back to their villages during the pandemic, like a migrant worker, construction worker, or a hotel worker. Domestic workers were strapped of that choice too. Where would they go? Unlike the migrant workers, who at least have a foot in the village, domestic workers have been living in the cities for longer durations and feel a sense of semi-permanence. They're almost there. They left their villages and come. Where will they go? When the lockdown descended and continued, their estranged relation with the villagers did not permit them to head back. Why do you want to come back now? That was a question posed by the villagers. They were in their hometowns and find employment. They could not even find under the Rural Guarantee, Mahatma Gandhi Rural Employment Guarantee Act. Or they could not even get involved in farming activities because they had left long back. This has once again raised the dire need for social security and protection for domestic workers. In fact, the Domestic Workers Welfare Bill and a draft compilation by the National Platform for Domestic Workers called as the Domestic Workers Regulation of Work and Social Security Bill 2017 is pending. In the long run, a legislation in favor and for domestic workers need to be implemented to protect them, to grant domestic workers equal rights to minimum wages, social security, skill development programs, forming unions at par with other workers of the unorganized sector. Sorry. Because they are the forerunners in the care economy. Domestic workers need protection from total social stigmatization and spread of COVID-19 insidiously too. In the 2-month lockdown, anecdotal evidence reveals that many domestic workers have been abruptly dismissed. It is really true. Received pay cuts, yes. I agree to all these things, have faced harassment or eviction from their rented accommodation due to inability to pay rent and have subsequently lost their livelihood sustenance. This has been a real true picture in cities, in apartments where large household number of apartments are there. This has been the true picture. In fact, they have been treated harshly by the Resident Welfare Association. Now, some resident welfare association have imposed a ban on entry of domestic workers into their localities, even if all precaution protocols are being followed, and others are allowing only those domestic workers traveling from green zones. All these problems. In some cases, domestic workers are not allowed in unless they have downloaded the Arogya Setu app on their phones. Now, all these problems has really made domestic worker a stigmatized person, and considering that she in 99% cases a woman, the problem is aggravated. Next slide, please. Migrant workers, yes, of course. I told you at the beginning of my presentation that the lockdown has severely impacted migrants, several of whom lost their jobs due to shutting of industries and were stranded outside their native place, wanting to get back. It really hurts when you recall those pictures. Therefore, the migrant workers problem is a peculiar problem. It's a peculiar problem because these are people, laborers, who have traveled far away from their destination to build our cities, our schools, our bridges, our roads, our malls, our cinema theaters, our marriage halls, convention halls. And when the pandemic came, when the lockdown was imposed, we just shut our door to them. They were shelterless, homeless, foodless, travelless, no access at all. And of course, later on, governments took measures to facilitate their transportation. The Honorable Supreme Court had to intervene, issue guidelines, and now there is a policy announced by the government that all the migrant workers will be covered under the various benefit schemes. They will be given identity cards so that whichever state they work, they can have access to food, shelter, etc. Thank you. Next slide, please. As I highlighted, people who migrate face peculiar challenges: lack of social security and health benefits, and poor implementation of minimum safety standards law, lack of portability of state provided benefits, because they would have been registered under the Building Construction Workers Act, say for example in Bihar, but that portability is not allowed. When that is not allowed, they cannot take benefit under public distribution system. Lack of access to affordable housing and basic amenities in urban areas. These are the special challenges of migrant workers, and these migrant workers are everywhere, every area, every industrial sector. They are garment workers. Some of them are employed domestic workers. Some of them work in hotels. Some of them work in hotel industries. Some of them work as cab drivers, etc. So, migrant population within India is so much has entered all urban activities area. Next slide, please. Now, if this is the problem or the impact of COVID-19, question how to overcome this challenge. Now, my research in terms of discussing about workers' right or the problem of workers, why whenever there is a problem, whether it is a bandh called by an organization, whether it is a strike, whether it is any communal disturbance, or whether it is a lockdown declared just now, what happened in India a few months back or world over, the first affected is the working class population, especially in the unorganized sector, in the informal sector. How do we address this issue? We speak about human rights. Under the UN Declaration, all human beings are guaranteed certain rights, certain basic rights. Let me also remind you that much before the United Nations organization could be formed and declare its preamble, etc., charter, the ILO must be credited, which in 1990, remember 1919, was the first international organization to speak about labor rights. And one of its earliest convention was on abolishing slave labor. If I remember correctly, it is the 1929 Slavery Convention which prohibited all kinds of slavery by abolishing forced labor. And in our constitution, Article 23 very specifically gives effect to the anti-slavery convention by prohibiting beggar or forced labor, beggary or forced labor, begar. Let me also remind you that in our approach to labor rights, the judiciary in the earlier years, I'm talking about the 1960s and the 70s and probably the 80s also, was very sympathetic towards the workers' rights. Why it is important to speak about workers' rights is that these are the fulcrum around which the society moves. Therefore, Justice Krishna Iyer, Justice Gajendra Gadkar, Justice Bhagavati, Justice Chinnapared, many people spoke in favor of workers' rights, interpreting the labor laws or interpreting the informal rights into drawing them into formal rights. And if you remember the famous case of PUCL versus Union of India, PUCL versus Union of India 1982 Asiad case, as we know, very beautifully Justice Krishna Iyer has described the condition, pathetic condition of a migrant worker. When a PIR was challenged as not maintainable, he said, now, do you expect that an illiterate worker who has traveled miles away from his hometown, along with his family and children, to come to this court alleging non-payment of minimum wage or exploitation? How is it possible? Because he is compelled by hunger to work. He is compelled to work because of helplessness. He has no other choice. He has no other choice because one day absence, his payment will be cut. His children will be without food. Under these circumstances, Article 23 was read into, PIL is justified, though it was the government said it is the public, it's the contractor who is violating the labor laws. It said no, Article 23 is applicable even to a private citizen and justified. So from there to several other decisions mark an era of considering labor rights as human rights as far as the Indian context is concerned. Why have I posed this question? Can we consider labor rights as human rights? There are three approaches to this. Therefore, I have discussed this in the recent literature that I found. Before we discuss about these three approaches, let me lightly take you to the fundamental element of a labor right. Labor rights are basically what? They are entitlements that relate specifically to the role of being a worker. Some of these rights are exercised individually. For example, right to work. If I want, I will work. If a worker wants, he will work at an effective rate or not. And others collectively, collective bargaining. They can include a right to work in a job freely chosen, a right to fair working conditions, which may encompass issues as diverse as wage or protection of privacy, a right to be protected from arbitrary and unjustified dismissal, a right to belong or represented by you, etc., etc., etc. These rights may be based on different foundations. I mean, the jurisprudential foundation of each right may be different, such as freedom, dignity, or capability, etc. Now, the question here is, if we consider labor rights as human rights, then there could be a universal approach in addressing the challenges faced by workers pre-COVID-19, post-COVID-19 also. One of the earliest first approach that many people promote is that it is known as the positive approach. The most straightforward answer to the question whether labor rights are human rights comes from positive perspective and is often found in international literature. If you look at the international literature, a positivist lists human rights treaties, whatever the UN document, human rights document. So a positivist says, look at the human rights treaties protecting labor rights or other documents explicitly recognizing labor rights as human rights as a starting point, and is satisfied that if the answer is positive, if it is sufficiently supported in law, then it is a human right. So, looking at the UDHR, which is a non-binding but enormously influential document, the positivist finds that several labor rights are human rights. Article 4 of the UDHR prohibits slavery and servitude. We have the ILO Convention 1929 prohibiting forced labor, slavery. So when Article 4 of the UDHR prohibits slavery and servitude, that means that particular right is a human right. And then they say that the positive would describe the legal protection that the international community affords labor rights, and would find that it decided to divide human rights into categories, recognizing them various degrees of protection. If you look at the international community, how is the international community defining various labor rights? And then accordingly, they will say that a certain kind of labor right is a human right and a certain kind of labor right is not a human right. Let me give an example. Treaties that followed the UDHR separated certain labor rights from some others. For example, it classified a group of them as civil and political rights in the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, right to an association, for example, and others as economic and social rights in the International Covenant on Economic, Social, Cultural, 1966. In a way, what this division of rights has done is, it mirrors the separation of human rights into two UN conventions, and therefore, two rights are divided into different rights. One, civil and political rights. Two, economic and social rights. Against this background, rights such as right to form and join a trade union and the right to privacy were categorized as civil and political rights. And rights such as the right to work, right to decent working conditions, or the right to strike were categorized as social and economic rights. What does this mean? The implication of this was that some of these were viewed as real human rights, while others were present as aspirational. To find an answer to the question whether labor rights are human rights, a positive would look at the ILO again, because ILO is the expert branch of UN in the field of labor rights. Now, as I've already told, ILO predates all human rights treaties. Question is whether the ILO itself views certain labor rights as human rights or not. Now, the problem with ILO itself was this. For many decades, the ILO did not explicitly present the documents adopted under its auspices as human rights document. For many years, it was like that only. Only in 1998, it said 4 core rights. It adopted binding conventions that incorporated labor standards and binding and non-binding recommendation. In recent years, however, of course, the ILO, endorsed a list of labor rights as human rights. In 1998, to be very specific, it adopted the Declaration of Fundamental Principles and Rights at Work. Declaration of Fundamental Principles and Rights at Work. The declaration binds all ILO member states, irrespective of whether they have ratified the relevant convention, and contains 4 core rights. So we may consider the following 4 core rights as human rights according to the positivist approach. What are they? Number 1, freedom of association and the right to collective bargaining. Number 2, the elimination of forced or compulsory labor. Number 3, the abolition of child labor. And 4th one, the elimination of discrimination in employment. So by listing these 4 rights as fundamental human rights, ILO itself has left a number of other labor rights outside the scope of declaration. So to conclude this debate on positive approach, I may say that the positivists say, insofar as these 4 core rights declared in 1998 by the ILO, we can at least consider that these labor rights are human rights, and therefore they need protection at the international level. Whether these rights were protected during the pandemic is another question of debate, or to what extent it was protected is another question of debate. I don't want to get into that debate now. As of now, I move on to the next approach, and that is known as the instrumental approach. Now, the scholars adopting this approach examine which labor rights are human rights according to the relevant documents, and assess how institutions and civil society organizations have responded in protecting them, so as to assess whether labor rights really are promoted on the rubric or within the framework of human rights. What the instrumental approach says is, okay, if some of these labor rights are recognized within the human rights document, further test is we must now see whether the institutions, whether the NGOs, whether the courts have supported these rights. Only then they will say these labor rights are human rights. Following this analysis, the character of labor rights as human rights is endorsed if either state and international institutions like courts or civil society organizations like trade unions and NGOs are successful in promoting them as such. Now what happens is, in order for a court to consider whether a particular labor right has reached a level of human right, the court would see how much the civil society supports such a movement, how much the trade union is in favor of such rights being recognized as human rights, and accordingly institutionalizes those rights in their judgment. So for example, that a person cannot approach, that an illiterate worker cannot approach the court because of his exploitative situation was recognized by the court in that PUCL versus Union of Delhi case. So the workers have a right on behalf of someone else filing a right on behalf of the workers becomes a PIL, fundamental right. Their fundamental right could be inquired at. Or some claims such as back wages, some claims as retrenchment compensation, closure compensation, layoff compensation. How these things are supported? Actually, during this pandemic, this has been the question, because some of you are raising this question whether employers can be forced to pay wages during the close down of an industry because employers themselves have suffered. Now, that is, we have to now see how the courts, the governments, how the civil society, trade union will take this pandemic as a right situation to enhance the capability of these rights becoming human rights. Now, in literature from different jurisdictions, scholars and activists assess the interplay between labor rights and human rights by exploring how courts fare in their protection. Now, we have seen whether it is in the European courts or American courts or England or in England or in India, many rights have come out to be recognized as human rights or workers' rights after several years. In fact, the right to form association is the best example. There was anti-combination law in England post-industrialization, and then we had the trade unions law. First, the government said you cannot combine together to interfere in others' right to trade and business. Then when the workers fought and when the ILO came into picture, in England, the trade union law was passed, giving them certain rights, giving them certain privileges, giving them insulation from criminal proceedings, giving them insulation from civil proceedings for all activities done in promoting trade union objectives. So that is one right which when considered as a human right because the courts have recognized that, unions have supported it, and the law has been enacted on that basis. The instrumental approach, to conclude, the instrumental approach relies upon how I and you, all of us, respond to the workers' plight, join the association, join the union as lawyers, as argue in the courts of law, and promote, yes, during the pandemic, employers have to pay the right to entitlement for wages. I mean, I'm not quantifying any certain of wages. At least bare minimum sustenance could be paid is my argument. The third approach is the normative approach. The third approach to the question, whether labor rights are human rights, is viewed as a theoretical one rather than positive or instrumental. It is only normative, they say. Their approach says it does not necessarily engage with positive law. It says how the laws have been developed, how much is the moral truth of labor rights, how has the norm developed. So they may say that, are labor rights universal? Are labor rights time bound? Are labor rights have immediate entitlement, etc.? So this question is to be approached normatively. And they case, for example, they say, look here, you cannot consider labor right as human right because the conditions of labor itself is different in different countries, developed, developing, least developed. The conditions of industrial activity, industrial development is different in different countries. The political setup is different in different countries. So when such being the case, how can you say that a particular labor right is a human right or not? And therefore they say no. Further, they say that labor rights as human rights is not urgent, or it is not compelling moral claims. There is no morality in labor rights. I mean, morality in the sense that a person in a freedom of contact of employment, how can you say during the pandemic, when the employer himself has suffered and closed down, how can you say morally the employer is liable to pay wages to the worker? So therefore, these are not universal. Maybe a thriving industry could do that. Not in India, not small scale industry, not MSMEs. That is one argument. The second argument is that, as I have already told, labor rights are not universal. A human right, if you look at the UN Charter, it is universal in its application. Labor rights do not embody standards that are strict enough. Unlike a human right approach, the standards for labor rights are not uniform, are not strict enough. Because if you look at the functioning of the ILO itself, the ILO passes a convention based upon the recommendation. It is then sent to the state authorities, to the member states to ratify it. After ratification, law must be passed. If no law is passed, the ILO cannot do anything. It can only censure. Then the matter will be taken up. Then other strategy will be used. So the strictness of the labor rights as human rights is no, you cannot match the strictness. Whereas a human right violation in any part of the world is immediately taken up by the United Nations, by the member states. So because of the lack of strictness, labor rights cannot be normatively considered as human rights. And the final argument is that labor rights evolve over a period of time. I mean, the labor movement grows, labor jurisprudence goes, while universal human rights are embodied timelessness. Universal human rights are timeless. That is forever. They are fundamental, unlike labor laws, labor rights. Labor rights are not human rights because they say we should not be seeking a justification for labor law human rights because they have not naturally evolved like human rights. However, to conclude this argument, as a student of labor law, I feel that this pandemic problem, what happened during the COVID-19 lockdown, has given rise to new thinking among all labor law scholars. In our support as academicians, as jurists, as lawyers, to say that certain labor rights are universal in nature. Many more pandemics may come. We may face the same situation. A society, a legal system, the morals of the society is good insofar as it meets the requirements, it mitigates the hardship of the most affected person. Upon that basis, it is time that collectively we respond to this situation. The living and working conditions, if you can look at domestic workers, especially in urban areas, pathetic. There is no right to privacy to domestic worker. The domestic worker's place of work is someone else's private work. The domestic worker is exploited by paying less than, by not paying, no leave, no paid. Look at this one. Migrant worker, despite the interstate migrant workers law enacted long back, its implementation is hardly anything good. There is no registration process. There is no data available with the Labor Department. If the data was available, the governments could have planned to slowly evacuate them to their respective places. Insofar as the Building and Other Construction Workers Welfare Act, there is a provision of collecting cess, workers' welfare cess. A board is there. The money is deposited, crores of rupees. I can tell you from my experience of completing a project in this regard for the UGC. Crores of rupees have been not spent at all. I completed this project in 2013-14. And now the entire money, I believe, don't quote me, but I believe the entire fund that was there was used for several purposes by the government. Not only, of course, to provide some basic benefit to the workers, but for several other purposes, to purchase so many things. What I'm trying to emphasize is we have a very beautiful legal system to protect. We could have protected this much better had we prepared for this, had we insisted on the implementation of all labor laws strictly. Because of our lethargy in implementing, workers' welfare fund was lying there unused. We could not plan, and this has created a severe impact. Despite the law protecting the unorganized welfare social security law being passed, we find the registration process is not complete. It is complicated. The registration process and the building workers is also complicated. It is not portable. The interstate migrant workers law is not implemented properly. The labor inspector did not maintain a register. All this have led to a severe impact on the workers. I have some more minutes to conclude, but I'm ready to take some questions, maybe some discussions also. Can we move on to the next slide? Yeah, this is my acknowledgement. Before I say thank you for inviting me, the Chancellor, the Governor of Telangana, the Registrar of Osmania University, the principal, the HOD, Dean Faculty of Law, and all the senior professors, faculty members of University Law College. I acknowledge for my preparation in this slide. Of course, mine was scheduled on 22nd. I don't know. It was preponed. So I had to very rush through my Independence Day celebration, other things in preparing these slides. I've used sources from the ILO reports, the NGO reports, and news analysis. So whatever I've said now does not belong to me, except that I spoke it out. I expressed it, that's all. All knowledge belongs to the open domain. It is for all of you to further research and contribute. Now moot question still remains. Why should we all bother about workers' rights or impact of COVID-19 on workers? We are individuals first, then we are a society, then we are a nation. So our roles are shared everywhere. As individuals, we have to care for our domestic worker. As society, we can contribute to the development of the migrant workers. As a nation, we can respond morally to mitigate the problem of the workers. The burden that a worker carries, can we carry that burden, is the question that I leave it to the audience. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. The first question is from Dr. Usha Sri. Sir, whether removal of employees or workers can be considered as a part of layoff because of the situation beyond the control of the management?
Definitely, if you go by the Industrial Disputes Act, and if you consider natural calamity, etc., the removal of the worker from the salary list can be considered as layoff. Now, the implications are different. When you say it is layoff because of certain natural calamities, you know, a labor law student would know that the employer would have to pay layoff compensation. So yes, the answer is yes, it can be considered. Because I am speaking for the worker, I will say yes. Next.
Dr. Jetlin Yellosa, ULC Telangana University. Sir, whether post-COVID-19 situation demands radical amendments in labor laws, what are international covenants regarding migrant workers?
Yeah, thank you for that question. You're triggering the labor lawyer in me by asking this question. Because in my practice, in the labor codes, and in my labor law teaching, and in my reading of labor law judgments by the Supreme Court, this is time enough to radically change the labor laws in India in terms of making it really impactful to the worker at the grassroots level. A migrant worker having a migrant labor card must be able to go a government fair price shop, obtain ration. Might be able to go to a compensation commissioner and say, look here, I've lost job, give me some money. He must be able to go to the housing minister and say, look here, provide me an accommodation. That sort of a labor law should be brought. Unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know what's happening now. Labor laws are now being codified into 44 central labor laws are now being codified into 4 labor codes. People say that these labor codes are almost replica of the labor laws, but there are some changes. The policy of liberalization, some state governments have already announced that we will extend the working hours, etc., etc. So when you look at these, I feel sorry that instead of bringing radical changes in the labor laws to help the worker, we're actually trying to hurt him more, number one. Number two, yes, on the migrant law issue, there is an international covenant on international migration, which is applicable to internation migration. Like, for example, people from India migrating to Dubai, to other Middle East countries, etc. Yes, there is a law, there is a detailed policy of how they should be. Even under the Indian law, the Indian interstate migrants law, there is a provision for payment of traveling allowance from the place of residence to the place of work and back for housing. All these provisions are very beautifully crafted in the 1974 law, but we don't know the implementation level. Thank you, sir.
Next question from Miss Shirisha Reddy. Good evening, sir. How will you justify pay cut not only in unorganized sector but also organized sector, even no exemption of legal institutions during COVID?
I don't first of all justify. I don't justify pay cuts, but see, look at the situation that the governments are in. Lack of collection of tax revenues has emptied the treasury almost. So as far as the government is concerned, government may only borrow and pay the workers in the organized sector. As far as the unorganized sector is concerned, there is a real issue because unorganized sector, the employers, the Chamber of Commerce, the trade unions, they have to respond. Now, how we fail to think about a situation where the employers themselves would not be able to pay be not be able to pay from their own treasury is something which no one can discuss. Of course, pay cuts are not justified. In a real situation, what else the workers would do? What else the employer would do? At least he must pay something for the bare survival. Now, this question has reminded me of one case long back when the Minimum Wages Act was challenged. In a particular industry, the constitutional validity of the Minimum Wages Act was challenged because the employer said, I am not going to pay the minimum wage because my workers are happy to receive less than the minimum wage. Number one. Number two, he says, if I pay the minimum wage, I'll be under loss. Number three, he says that no other industry in this area is paying the minimum wage, so why should I pay? Striking upon that particular argument of the employer, the court said, we cannot allow workers to work on starvation wages. Rather, you can close the industry, not exploit the helplessness of the work. That is the jurisprudence of minimum wages built in 60s and 70s. Now we find a situation during pandemic when the employee himself does not have anything to pay. It's a question of morality. It is a question of how society develops. We cannot have a clear-cut laws on this because then your fundamental right to carry on business versus the right to live. All this will come into conflict situation. Thank you.
Sir, the same question has been asked by two participants, Mr. Vishal Rai and Abhilash Srivastav. Sir, whether phasing out of labor laws in Uttar Pradesh is constitutional or not?
Yes, of course, it is not constitutional because if you remember Article 41, 42, 43, etc. in our constitution, we have promised. Please remember that in India, the freedom struggle was obtained because the trade union said if they have to get rid of the imperialist employees, the Borgheses as they called, Karl Marx called, in India, if they have to fight the Britishers, they must fight by joining the political movement for independence. So when they joined the political movement for independence, they also promised the workers that once we get independence, your rights will be protected. And the same thing Bharat Ratna Dr. Ambedkar provided in the constitution. So therefore, how can anyone justify the phasing away or the dilution of the promises that we have made to the workers in the constitution? In fact, after this order was issued, I think it was withdrawn and there's some litigation going on that issue as far as UP is concerned. Thank you.
Next question from Mr. Krishna Reddy. The same has also been asked by another participant. What is the specific role of ILO during pandemic situation worldwide? And why India ratified only 4 conventions out of 23 in social security group by ILO?
Now, first of all, the ILO role insofar as the pandemic is concerned is inquire, advise. Inquiring by looking into the problems of the problems faced by the workers in different countries and advising them. So I read out the 4 pillars, pillar 1, 2, 3, 4. If you have seen my slides, those were the recommendations made by the ILO, and some of these, including India, if you go to the ILO website, you can see the ratification or the implementation stage of all these 4 pillars by respective countries, including India. Therefore, I told that the government, since the lockdown, since the first financial package, the government has been seriously announcing several measures in fulfilling the ILO recommendation. That is the role. ILO is inquiry, recommendation, channelize the efforts in mitigating, in lessening the problems of workers. The other thing was ratification. No, India has ratified several conventions. When I spoke about the 4 conventions, I said ILO has in 1990 declared this as 4 core rights of the labor rights. Apart several conventions that many we have ratified, Most of them we have ratified, one or two we have not ratified, but most of them we have ratified. Only the 4 conventions which I spoke about is the 4 convention which the allows a fundamental declaration of workers' right, which some of them argue are the 4 important labor rights which can be equated to human rights.
Sir, next question from Srini P. How far collective bargaining agreements are enforceable in law as violations of human rights?
It's a problem here. Now, a collective bargaining is a free agreement between 2 parties. Its violations, the provisions of violations of collective bargaining agreements could be considered as a contractual violation and also violations under several labor laws. That can be equated as a violation of human rights is a moot question, a debatable question. Because I told you during my presentation, there is no universal agreement on labor rights as human rights. Therefore, the debate is still open. However, if those violations pertaining to the 4 core fundamental labor rights recognized by the ILO, probably then you can equate them and fight as a violation of human rights, not only by filing petitions in the courts of law, but also starting a public movement. But again, remember, if these collective bargaining agreements are limited only to 1 or 2 or limited industry, then it loses its value as a human right, because this should be not considered as universal right.
From Ms. Neha Agarwal, sir, as the 4 labor codes replacing the existing labor laws are underway, do you think it is appropriate time to include minimum mandatory protection and provide the floor, that is, leave the ceiling to state governments?
Yes. 100% I agree with the suggestion that the minimum protection should be drafted within the courts. Minimum protection as far as security of tenure, health, protection of wages, the ceiling limit, the minimum limit. More than that, state governments, private industries can negotiate and maybe increase through collective bargaining negotiations. Good suggestion.
Good evening. It's an honor to present vote of thanks to Professor Sudesh sir. As we have seen in this lecture that sir focused on the impact of COVID-19 on the collarless employees and also the ILO's 4 pillars to reduce such impact, these issues which have significance in the present situation. So on behalf of the organizers of this workshop and also the participants, I thank Professor Sudesh sir for accepting our invitation and delivering such an extensive lecture. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I thank all of you for patiently listening to me. Thank you so much. Professor Mohan Krishna, thank you so much. You're glued in, I can see you. Many people are there. Thank you. Nice meeting you all. Okay, thank you. Thank you once again, Professor Venkateshwarlu sir. Thank you.